We come to the last speaker of the day, last but not the least. Speaker is a veteran economist who has contributed immensely to the nation's development policy through visionary concepts and strategies. The Honorable Minister Senior for International Monetary Cooperation and Deputy Minister Finance and Planning, Dr. Sarath Amunugama. Dr. Sarath Amunugama was born on 10th July 1939, the year of the beginning of World War II. He studied at Trinity College, Kandy, and graduated from the University of Colombo. He joined the prestigious Ceylon Civil Service in 1962. Following the de-establishment of the CCS, he was transferred to its successor, the Ceylon Administrative Service, which was later renamed as the Sri Lanka Administrative Service. During his career in the Sri Lanka Administrative Service, he served as a government agent of the Kandy district, Director of Information, Permanent Secretary to the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, and later Chairman, the Associated Newspapers of Ceylon Limited. Before entering active politics, he worked as an international civil servant for UNESCO headquarters in Paris. University education received by Dr. Amunugama did not restrict him to a single professional field. In the 1950 decade, social science had a novel experience for Sri Lanka. Social science had a high international value and recognition as a window of opportunity to unravel social, economic, cultural, and scientific information about the entire human race. After completing his undergraduate studies, he briefly served as a lecturer in social science at the same university from 1961 to 1962. During this time, he conducted a series of social research in league with his teachers at Matale and Hiniduma, Madagama in the Galle district. This research work gave him vital experience, which was of great assistance to him in his later life. A turning point in his life came in 1962 when he passed the civil service examination at higher standard to enter the administrative service. Dr. Amunugama has served as the Secretary of Communication and Information Center of the UN Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization based in Singapore from 1982, and subsequently as the UN International Program Director of Communication in Paris. Thereafter, the UNDP called upon him to cooperate with Chile's former Foreign Affairs Minister to organize the UN News Network of Development News. He had also obtained a doctorate in social science from the University of Paris, and many research papers done by him enabled Dr. Amunugama to strike up a Harvard job, where he served as a visiting lecturer in social science at the Harvard University, USA. By this time, Dr. Amunugama had published 15 research papers and 3 books based on these papers. Elected as a Member of Parliament for Kandy district, representing the Galagadar electorate in 1994, he remains as a parliamentarian to date, uninterrupted. Appointed a minister in 1999, he has so far held the portfolios of rehabilitation, irrigation, water management, education, higher education, finance and planning, industries and investment promotion, public administration and home affairs, and enterprise development and investment promotion at various times. He has also functioned as a senior presidential advisor on economic affairs, Currently, he is an International Monetary Cooperation Senior Minister and Finance and Planning Deputy Minister. Holding all these high positions is a testament to Dr. Amunugama's exceptional talents as a veteran, politician, diplomat, social scientist, and an artist too. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome Dr. Sarath Amunugama to speak on the topic Sri Lanka, claiming a stake in global prosperity.
My distinguished friend, Nimad Cabral, Governor of the Central Bank, Army Commander, and all the other distinguished participants at this meeting. I want to begin by thanking the organizers of this seminar for inviting me to be present here and to say a few words about Sri Lanka's role in sharing global prosperity. I must say that this is a very useful exercise because often we don't have the opportunity of taking a long-range view of some of the challenges that confront us. This is not the first time that I've addressed this defense seminar, and I know how useful it is that we can take some time out to meet distinguished people like you and to exchange ideas and to take a long-term view of what actions we should take to meet global challenges. I must also say that global prosperity is not something that we can take for granted just now. The last few years have seen many challenges to the global economy. And just over the last 6 months, I think, these problems have increased, and all the leading financial and monetary institutions have scaled down their earlier projections regarding global growth. So the global economy is going through a difficult phase. At the same time, the drivers of global growth are found in Asia, particularly East Asia. But I'm happy to say that among these drivers of global growth, the benchmarks that have been set up regarding growth, in that Sri Lanka has become something of a role model. We have not only conclusively and successfully eliminated terrorism, which is a very rare occurrence in the modern world. I think all of us in the hall today, knowing the events of the last few months, know how difficult it is to comprehensively defeat terrorism. So Sri Lanka has a very enviable record, I think, in the first place, as being a country supported by a very able security establishment. It's a country which has been able to decisively defeat terrorism. The proof of that is available to you. You can move about in this country, any place, at any time. It is one of the safest places in the world. What was 5 years ago or 6 years ago, one of the most dangerous places in the world is today, we are happy to say, one of the safest places in the world. So that itself is a great tribute to the capabilities of the Sri Lankan nation. as my friend Niwad said, not only in the political sphere, but also in the security and economic sphere. We have been able to have an outstanding record during the last 5 years. And I'm happy to say that our experiences also will be important to all of you here as we discuss some of the big global challenges that confront us at this time. Now, when we think of going into details of Sri Lanka's potentialities to engage with this global growth, we have to think of almost the theoretical economic framework within which we can position our approach. I am a great admirer of the thinking of Justin Lin, whom Niwad and I have met many times. He was the chief economist of the World Bank. He's gone back now to China and is the head of one of the biggest economic think tanks in Beijing. And in his writings, which are called the New Structural Economics, he has emphasized the notion of comparative advantage in a globalized economy. Each country, each economy must focus on those elements, what are called factor endowments, which helps it to position itself as a country with comparative advantage. So it is in that background, in that framework, that I think we should look at Sri Lanka's relationship with the growing global economy. Now, when we look at it, look at the potentialities of Sri Lankan growth in a globalized world, in a globalized economy, the first thing that strikes us, or strikes anybody, is our geographical position. As Niwad mentioned, and he nicely explained in his slides, we are developing the hub concept. The hub concept is based on the fact that we are also geostrategically placed in a hub in the global map. Just look at the tremendous advantages, and I would even say unique advantages, that Sri Lanka has in terms of its geostrategic, its geographical, its geopolitical positioning. Firstly, we are midpoint between the Middle East and the Far East. Midpoint between the oil producers and the oil users. We have been talking very often to Japanese authorities, to Chinese authorities, to Singapore authorities, to all those authorities who depend for every single drop of oil that they bring from the Middle East to their own countries to run their economies. They know how vital it is that they go past the shores of Sri Lanka. There is a book by Robert Kaplan, who is a professor at Harvard. It's called Monsoon. And these obviously are scenarios that, intellectual scenarios, and only intellectual, I hope, that are being tried out. On these shipping lanes, and by the way, by the shores of Sri Lanka in Hambantota, absolutely 2/3 of the world's shipping goes by that port, within 6 kilometers of Hambantota. This is, if you take all the global shipping, the aggregate of all the sea lanes, then more than 2/3 of that because it carries oil to China, to Japan and Far East, goes by 6 kilometers of our new port of Hambantota. And last week, I went to visit that port because I was on some political work. And I was amazed and I was very surprised, pleasantly surprised to find that with our new oil facility, 2 large tankers have already come for refueling at Hambantota. So we are lying in the center of the largest sea lane in the world. Nothing short of that. This is something that even I think Sri Lankans don't know very much about. It includes Atlantic traffic, Pacific, all that. With all that, 2/3 goes by the Hambantota. Then the second factor. To the north of us is the largest emerging market of the world, the subcontinent of India, which was earlier British India, you may call it that, colonial India, whatever you may call it that. Today it has India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, all those countries. It's a huge growing market, and now on the trajectory to, we think, fast economic growth. So you can think of the great implications for Sri Lankan growth. The largest market, the largest middle class, and attracting as a synergy to some of the things that we can offer, like tourism, like IT, like science and technology, all those areas which we can synergize with these great neighboring states just to the north of Sri Lanka. And we have, policy-wise, worked on that because we have a free trade agreement now with India and a free trade agreement with Pakistan. Our distinguished High Commissioner is here, my friend Prasad, who served with great distinction in India. So we have very good relations, and we have tremendous potentialities, both countries, which is provided to us by this geographic situation. As I always say, history and geography both links us to India. Then look at the south. From Sri Lanka to the South Pole, I'm glad to recognize my good friend Dr. Subramanian Swamy, great friend of Sri Lanka. He shares some of these views. Then from the south point of Sri Lanka, right down to the South Pole, there's no landmass. Absolutely no landmass. You can imagine what it means when just outside the Indian Ocean, Vietnam, China, Philippines, Indonesia, they are all engaged in small or large conflicts regarding ownership of those islands. Today it's a huge diplomatic war, just short of a shooting war, when we think of what is happening in all those islands, not too far from us. But Sri Lanka has unimpeded access right down to the South Pole. And according to the law of the sea, our, what I would call the sea area as against our land area, is 20 times the size of the land area. So it's a mind-boggling opportunity for Sri Lanka, because the world is moving towards what is called the blue economy. It's not the blue of our political party, but it's a concept of a blue economy. In the coming decades, if you take a long-term view, the 2020 view or 2040 view, Sri Lanka will have access unimpeded to potentially one of the largest sea areas from the south of Sri Lanka, unimpeded to the South Pole. Now this is today becoming an area of great geopolitical interest. The Indian Ocean, which was what was called the the pond of the British colonialists. A British colonial pond is today a mega site of global contention. The talk of, the string of pearls, one theory. The two largest growing navies in the world, the Chinese Navy and the Indian Navy. Even the last couple of weeks we hear of the need to expand the Indian Navy, the US Navy's operations in the Indian Ocean. So the old colonial pond is today becoming a major center of global interest. So here we are, midpoint from oil producers to oil users, south of the world's biggest growing market, and north of the unimpeded access to the South Pole, and growing geopolitical considerations about developments in the Indian Ocean. So if you invert the map, which is today based only on land, the land space, what we know as what we learned from school days as this is the map of the world, or what we know as the globe, emphasizes land areas. But if you shift your interest, or if you shift your focus more to the sea, then I think Sri Lanka becomes of great importance. So we are talking of great potential. Now, let me look at some of the implications of this. If you look at since the army is also well represented, it may be, and Dr. Swami is also here, to look at the origins of this LTT conflict. There may have been indigenous reasons, but there are also exogenous reasons. Exogenous reasons were many. One was, I think, everybody would agree, that period when Madam Indira Gandhi shifted away from traditional Indian concepts and was very aggressive both at home and abroad. There was a period of emergency, which is now universally condemned, I think, at home. And there was a period of foreign policy aggression abroad. The breakup of Pakistan, the birth of Bangladesh, the intervention in Sri Lanka, all these forms a particular period. And unfortunately, this aspect has not been taken into account in the progression of the war, and how this particular period was, I would think, and I would argue, and I think many Indian thinkers today would argue, was an aberration in the normal relationships with India, which was, of course, later set right with Rajiv Gandhi and so on. So these are matters that we have to consider in terms of our geographical position. So this is something that our factor advantage of our geographical position, I think, cannot be minimized. Then this Justin Lin's analysis is talking of hard and soft infrastructure. If you look at what has happened in Sri Lanka during the 5 years, the government and the private sector, they have invested very heavily in infrastructure. I mean, the answer to that is very obvious. A country for 30 years was denied every opportunity of even normal growth because of the war. Roads could not be built, our irrigation systems could not be repaired, because a lot of it was in the north and east and in the north central province, close to the war zone. So a country for 30 years was a sort of care and maintenance operation. Must, and it is only right, that they should invest in this hard infrastructure development. And today we have made a great success of it. And I must say, we have to thank our president and everybody who worked with him for these bold steps regarding infrastructure. When many people talk of infrastructure, just a road or a canal or a bridge. But very few people think of a aggressive and determined investment in infrastructure. Not just roads and canals, but an airport, a seaport, in energy supplies. Sri Lanka is the only country in South Asia which guarantees a continuous 24/9 supply of electricity. There was a time when we had to tell investors, now you bring your own generator. I mean, that's hardly a confidence building exercise. So that period is gone. Today Sri Lanka can boldly tell any investor, compared to any Asian country, I would particularly say South Asian country, Sri Lanka is one country which we can give it in writing that you will have a continuous supply of energy. So this is the type of investment that has gone on, and that is the type of hard infrastructural investment that is part of the theory of new structural economics. That is a must for growth. And I'm glad that India also now has got onto the path. I mean, you have to have balanced growth. In each country's history, particularly in South Asia, because we got the vote very early, we entered the democratic process early, and a large part of our population are rural people. So we have to have state intervention to help these people. We have to have social welfare, whatever some economists may say. But at the same time, we cannot restrict ourselves to that social welfare path alone. That is the meaning of the title, in a global economy. So we have to make those hard investments. And I'm glad to say that though we have made these large investments as a factor of GDP, since our GDP is growing, the ratio of our debt to GDP is growing steady, is going down steadily. And that is the proper way. Not to just have cuts to save your ratio between GDP and debt, but to use that debt to expand your GDP so that the ratios become much more favorable and attractive. And I think in that sense, Sri Lanka is a good model. Niwad and I recall the time when we used to go to the IMF and World Bank and listen to several lectures. We were the recipients of many lectures. But as we go along, every year, I must say, we grew more bolder, more confident. We had more to offer. And today we are lecturing them. So there's been a shift in emphasis. That is because that is a reflection of the type of economic growth that takes place in our country. The recent Article 4 sort of study, review by IMF is very positive. They report to their board about what is going on. Not only the IMF, but other financial institutions also have given a good record. So Sri Lanka needs to be looked into as a country which has very successfully combated terrorism. It is becoming a major global issue. I mean, now with these activities going on in the Middle East, you don't have to be Einstein to predict that there will be an upsurge of terrorism in the future. You see the pattern. Every time there has been this type of conflict, it has been followed by a period of global terrorism, hitting where civilians, aviation, shipping, sports, all those areas where innocent people are most vulnerable. There is a certain, almost I would say, mathematical frequency to this sort of situation. So the world is going into a very difficult terrain, very difficult period where terrorism will raise its head. Sri Lanka is the only country that was able to decisively defeat that. That we should be able to exchange our experiences rather than condemning each other. Because you will see, as we have seen in the last few months, for example, many of those complaints that were made against Sri Lanka have been magnified thousandfold in what is happening today in the Gaza Strip and in the Middle East. So there is a certain proportion. New thinkers are now coming saying that certain amount of collateral damage is inevitable. I read only the last week, and very clearly the Israeli position is that these people, the Palestinians, had been locating their arms, their heavy weapons, their long-range missiles within civilian encampments, streets, and of all things, even in hospitals. So this is the sort of debate that is going on, and I think it's totally unfair to blame Sri Lanka, which actually did its, as we all know, did its very, very best to limit civilian casualties. And I think if you have seen some of the clips of how our army even went without their food and shelter, intervened to bring these people across the water on their shoulders, carried the children onto the other side. It's a very inspiring tale, rather than the type of unnecessary calumny that they have been subject to. So Sri Lanka, when you think of the hard investments in infrastructure, and before that, the investment in peace, and also our long investment in human capital. This is something that we have to emphasize. The Sri Lankan emphasis on education, on health, on social welfare is beginning to pay off. I think, if I speak for myself, and frankly, we also have made certain mistakes. For example, at a certain time, we moved away from global languages. We moved away, or we did not embrace enough of the scientific and technological aspects in our curriculum. There were difficulties like that, but we are now setting it right. Every Sri Lankan child is expected to know 3 languages. His mother tongue, the language of the minority, which is the Tamil language, which is not there even in India, Dr. Swami, and he will know an international language. We have changed the curriculum for that. So, on the one hand, we have had peace, we have invested in infrastructure, we have invested in hard infrastructure as well as soft infrastructure, and given our geographical position, which we are now enhancing through the hub concept, I think Sri Lanka can do very well. The central bank and the Ministry of Finance have offered in our Hambantota area, we have brought new legislation which allows so many tax benefits, so many concessions for people who are going to invest in that area, special areas. And we also have what is called the strategic investment law, where if that investment is of substantial value and also an investment that we consider to be strategic in terms of our own growth, like maybe petroleum, maybe IT, maybe the tourism sector, we can give them concessions way beyond what has been offered by others. And finally, I want to end up with some very good news, which is the type of oil and gas exploration that has gone on in this country. In the Mannar coastline, the blocks we share with India, on one side is the Sri Lankan blocks, on the other side you have the Indian blocks. There have been very positive responses, and even more than that, we have found new large deposits of gas on the east coast. And just now I'm told that, for example, Total of France has shown interest. So there is, I think, much reason to be optimistic in terms of those mega things into which we must now move to integrate with the global economy and also raise the living standards and incomes of our people that the Governor of the Central Bank so well explained to you just a moment ago. Thank you very much.